Hi, everyone. Good evening. I hope everyone can hear me. Welcome to today's session of Series Scripts, which is a conversation of women in translation. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm Asha, and I'm from the Word Lab team at IHS. And Series Scripts is our monthly curation of book talks, panel discussions, lectures, and more that bring the city alive. If you'd like to know more about what we do, please visit the links in our chat. Today, we'll be taking questions towards the end, so you can use the Q&A box to share your questions or comments, and you can address it to either one or all the speakers. I'm very happy to introduce our panelists for the day. We have Soumya VB, and she's a Telugu writer and translates between Telugu and English. She's an artificial intelligence researcher by profession and is very interested in exploring the role of AI in all things related to literature. We have Geeta Ramaswamy, who's a writer, translator, and co-founder of Hyderabad Book Trust, and now runs the English imprint Southside Books. She has authored and translated several works from Telugu to English. Her memoir, Land Guns Cast Women, the memoir of a lapsed revolutionary, was a bestseller in 2022. IPSA is a teacher and translator with an MA in English and Gender Studies. Their research explores urban spaces and queer bodies in speculative fiction. While the rigor of academia leaves little time for creative work, they continue to pursue poetry, shuttling between two continents. Their writing has been published by Zuban, Blaft, and Penguin India. Our moderator for this evening is Bidisha Mahanta, who's a feminist researcher with a focus on gender, citizenship, conflict, and peace building, disability, and more. With a decade of experience working with women's groups and collectives, especially focused in Northeast India. She's currently editing a volume on women, queer, trans, and non-binary persons' experiences of belonging in Northeast India through visual research practices. And she has an upcoming chapter on conflict, peace building, citizenship, and gender in an edited volume published by Edinburgh University Press. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening for this conversation, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Asha and Ishani. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Just checking if I'm audible. Yeah. Okay, great. So I feel very underconfident about coming on this panel, sitting with all of these translators and with the legacy of publishing. But here I am. And I would actually like to start by talking about the journey that all of us, all of the panelists took in the world of translations. And I understand that like a lot of us are quite new to the world of translation, but some of us have had started the journey as a publisher in translating. So it might be interesting to map out as writers, as authors, as translators. How did you start? What were the changes you saw? And like I think the first few minutes maybe you can spend introducing our work. Ipsa, can we start with you?
Sure. My name is Ipsha. I'm the youngest translator on this panel, I think, and feeling very awed and intimidated in the presence of everybody else. But I have been translating professionally for about 2-ish years now. Uh, the first book that I translated, Hidden Treasure, was published in 2024, and then another project that I was on that I'll speak about later also published the same year. But I think I started out as a writer, enjoyed writing poetry, and I never exactly thought that I would become a translator. But I think language has always been um, a, a passion of mine, a sort of hobby of mine. And so when I started practicing translation in university, that process is what led me here. And I think that translating in a lot of ways has made me a better writer and a better reader, and also brought me much closer to my mother tongue than I would have expected. The translations that I've done have also been parts of very cool projects. The first one that I did, Hidden Treasure, by Shongita Bandyopadhyay, was part of the Women Translating Women project, which is still ongoing out of Ashoka Center for Translation and Zuban. And the second translation that I did was actually a co-translation between me and my friend and longtime contributor Protiti. And it was a sci-fi story that we published in the Blaft book of Anti-Caste SF. So Co-translation itself has also been a very integral part of my translation journey, and I think that I've enjoyed translation as a collaborative process for a long time. So I'm interested to see the conversations that come out of this very collaborative panel we're having today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ipsa. I think we can both join each other in being younger and also being intimidated. But I think hidden treasures, I mean, I have questions about it, but I think we decided we'll go alphabetically. So, Geeta, you are up next. And I promise you, Geeta, I'll stop you at 5 minutes. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was not into translation or literature for a long time. I studied mathematics in university, but always read books and loved books, but never thought of where books sort of, coalesce with need to change. And in university, I got involved in radical politics, and that took about a decade or so. And then I realized that books are very important for change. Books are very important for activists. Books are very important for people to know what's happening so they have a better judgment. And that's when I joined the effort to, found the Hyderabad Book Trust with four others, and that was the journey in Telugu literature. I mean, English, it was, you see, at that time there was reverse snobbery. Anything in English one would look down upon because it had nothing to do with local people. So it was all Telugu publishing for a very long time, till about 20 years ago, when Telugu readers would come to us and say, my daughter can't read Telugu. Please give us the English of this book. And that's how slowly we've begun to realize that you can't fight people. You have to sort of go along with them. And we started Southside. And I've always been interested in getting new scripts, commissioning books, and most of my effort has gone into that. And somewhere around, I think about 20 years ago, is when I picked up a book to read, a Telugu book, and I liked it so much. I translated it as it went, and that was my first translation. I've written books, but my first translation was this account of a village life, of seeing through the eyes of a young boy. And after that, I searched for other books. I said, oh, I can translate. And, there are not too many translators from Telugu. So I picked up other works. And after that, it's been a steady, till we started Southside, I've been translating whatever I liked and whatever is possible to get published. And largely, we've gone through Delhi publishers. So publishing has given me, I think, there's a lot of experience in getting a book together and selling it. For me, selling is maybe equal, or if not more important, part of producing a book, because selling is where one comes in touch with the readers. One speaks to the reader, one actually meets readers, discusses with them, finds out what's in their mind. Why does a book click? Why does a book not click? And so that feeds into what you want to produce next. So for me, marketing, selling has been a very important part of, and also because we are not funded. If you don't sell a book, you can't produce the next book. So it's been like, selling has been very important. So I keep in touch with readers and bookshops. A lot of my time goes into that. And I think, I mean, I don't know. Well, now I'm into publishing for like, say, 45 years. So it's, I don't know what to say of it. Would I have done something else? Do I regret? No, absolutely no. It's wonderful to work with books. It's not so nice to work with writers. Writers are all fatheads. Writers have got, egos. So not too many writers I've met whom I'd like as human beings. You want to meet good human beings. And I think writers have to work on their egos. I'm sorry for being so blunt, but the pleasurable part has always been with readers and with a whole host of translators like Soumya here, who put in their, who put in their lives, their passion into the translation. And such a delight to work with so many translators from Telugu to English, English to Telugu. And then, of course, bringing out a book is like a baby. Every time you get a new it's like a new baby. It's like, how's the nose? How's the mouth? Can she speak? Can she walk? Can she whatever? So the book is like, when a book comes out from the press, it's such an exciting thing. It makes up for all the horrible things that go into making a book. With publishing is not an easy thing. It's very painful. But when a new book comes out, it washes away, all the difficulties which one faced earlier. So I mean, I'm 71 now, will be 72 this December. So I think I have another 2 or 3 more productive years in which there's so many things I want to do. And the time is less, but it's an exciting time now, because uh, mm, about 20 years ago wasn't such a good time, both for the Indian languages and for English literature. But now, with so many translations coming up, with younger people interested in their own native tongues, it's an exciting time. I think my 5 minutes is up.
Yeah, that was great. And also, I think there are many more years left, Geeta, to be productive. So we'll see about that. But Samya, yeah, what about you?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I come from a slightly different background compared to Isha and Geeta. I don't have any professional experience with translation or literature. I just read a lot, and I got into translating into Telugu when I was in engineering, when I was studying my engineering, and then I continued doing that a little bit. And I translated Satyajit Ray's film essays into Telugu, which came out as a book like in 2011. And a year later, when I met Geeta Garu at Hyderabad Book Trust office, she suggested this idea of translating into English, which I thought was completely, out of what I can possibly do. But she somehow convinced me to do it, and that was the sharp knife of memory. It was an autobiography of Kondapalli Koteswarama, Telugu, Vijjana Bharati, which was published by Hyderabad Book Trust. The English translation was published by Zuban. So this came out in 2015, and after that, I just left these things. I just thought it's not for me. I didn't write stories or translate or anything for like 7 or 8 years. And then I started again. I read a Telugu story by a writer called Malipuram Jagadish. So he's from the Savara community in the Andhra Orissa border, and he writes about his own experiences in short stories. So I read one story called Tihili's Wedding. So Tihili Pelli, that is the Telugu title. And looking at that, I somehow it recreated that interest in translation in me. And I thought, these are the kind of stories that we should see in English. We don't have people who seem to be doing this. And then I started trying to translate some stories again. After I did a few stories, when I was talking to Geeta Garu, she again convinced me into a book length translation 10 years later. So we have this translation of Endapalli Bharati's short stories. So I owe both my English translations to Geeta, Geeta Garu. And yeah, hopefully it will continue. I don't know. Like my daily life is completely away from these kind of discussions. So I don't know how long I'll continue translating. Yeah, we'll see.
I think, Soumya, the point of having conversations like this is to make sure that you continue doing translation. So I think thanks everyone for giving us a brief, glimpse into how all of you got into translation. So just taking off from there, I think one of the questions that we often think about while talking about translations is how when women translate, we look at the very rich inner lives of women and how those are not like homogeneous lives. And this counts as both like how we see fiction that IPSA has worked on, as well as non-fiction that Soumya has worked on. And Geeta's question about how there's more fiction translations rather than non-fiction translations. So IPSA, if you could start, would you like to think about how the idea of women translating women also gives us a space, or sometimes not, to talk about this inner lives and to break that idea of homogeneity, and also to talk about like anti-caste spaces, talk about women's resistance to patriarchy in different ways, which is often very strong in the writings in local languages, but or in like Indian languages, but don't often find translators or a bigger market space. And then I'll come to Geeta with a slightly modified question. So it's
Sure. So If I could speak with reference to my translation, so Shongita Bandyopadhyay's book, Shongita has been translated a little bit before, but this story, I think, is unique and I think also a special first translation for me because despite it being the kind of story that I think a lot of readers would expect to come out of a sort of regional or Indian language, with having a sort of domestic setting with a woman at the center of that story. And this is how a lot of people might view feminist quote unquote fiction. But I think that this story in particular complicated those boundaries a lot in that the woman who is at the center of the story really takes the narrative by its horns and is not the narrative doesn't shy away from talking about her erotic desires and the way that these desires are sort of suffocated by the pressures of the household that she has. And it is interesting to see that she can live a lot of dreams and she does live a lot of dreams or dreams a lot despite being placed in this household, living in a house that she does not even, that a room that she's renting. And despite all of that, she still has those erotic dreams and desires, as well as the desire for economic upliftment and all of these things. So it's a story that, by and of itself, and I think that when women write and bring stories from these bylanes and such of cities where conversations are happening in very colloquial fashion, like I always say about this book, it feels a lot like you've sort of just eavesdropped into your neighbor's, conversation that's happening in the next house. And by default of that fact, I think those stories are very deeply rooted in stories of caste, religion, and this story being placed in the 1970s or 80s as such also is strongly absorbed in that moment. And I, as a woman reader myself, and though I use they or them pronouns, and my understanding of my own gender has also evolved over time. I think that conscious engagement with my gender also has influenced me as a reader and as a translator when I was reading this book. And it became very important for me to bring that flavor of the language and that flavor of this main character's inner world out into the translation. So I think I've moved around the question a little bit in answering. But I think that what I'm trying to say is that each of these books, and especially books that are now coming out in translation, with us looking at a lot of books in many Indian languages that haven't been given attention to, that is where I think you're likelier to find these shades of stories that won't necessarily always get won't necessarily receive awards, won't necessarily get platformed or be deemed even internationally as something that is worthy of awards. But I think that as readers and translators and people in the publishing industry who have this responsibility to send out literature and fiction to a national audience, I think these books are of very great importance right now. And perhaps that is an angle that we should be looking at rather than, sort of judging or thinking about books only through some of the categories of award fiction and, literary fiction that we have known so far.
Thanks, Ipsa. I think it resonates with the panel also to think about books beyond the idea of awards and or literary fiction. I have a slightly modified question for Geeta, but coming to this is that when looking at some of these translations, and Hyderabad Books Trust did start with the translation work, and you brought it to the market and looked at different kinds of translations from English to Telugu. But now that you are going back, not going back, but doing English translations, how is the reception of Indian languages to English when we look at women's lives? Like you talked about the market, how funding is important. And when we talk about, when we look at some of these things that IPSA has also brought about, like the inner lives of women, how difficult or how, like, not difficult, but how different it is than what is identified as an Indian woman. So, what has been the market like? What has been your experience with readers or bookstores, like that you talked about? That it's a pleasure to interact with them. Geeta, you have to unmute.
Yeah, where readership is concerned and where women's writing is concerned, there's a clear difference between the Telugu reader and English reader. What is acceptable to an English reader may not be acceptable to a Telugu reader. So, with a book in English, like say Toni Morrison's Beloved, I thought would be next to impossible to do it in Telugu. So many books which I enjoy personally reading, I somehow feel that the translating of that milieu, that idiom is very difficult in Telugu for the Telugu. It's not that the Telugu reader is moral. The Telugu reader is radical. Actually, the Telugu reader is more radical than the English reader, but radical in the sense of knowing the village level, basti level, what's happening with the poorer people. In that sense, and wanting change, Telugu reader is more radical. But where the women's question is concerned, I think Telugu society is more conservative than uh, the English society. And also, the thing is, there are some things which are not to be talked about. That silence has not been broken in Telugu, whereas I think it's been broken to a large extent in English. So one has to be careful in Telugu. So when we pick texts, I always say no, this won't do for Telugu, and I'm never able to explain why. It becomes an instinctive feeling after some time, a gut feeling that this book will absolutely not find readers. Now it's okay if a book has few readers. There might be some books which are ahead of their times. There are some books, but which have to be translated. And 10 years down the line, you're going to find readers for that. But there are some books where, and I think books which break taboos, which break things, also require movements along with them. We started Hyderabad Book Trust when there was a radical movement in Andhra Pradesh. Radical in the sense that it was really a time of great change and upsurge among young people. So we could print 5,000 copies of any of our books and sell them. And slowly, as you see, after the 90s especially, radical movements have died down. Women's movements have been confined to a small layer of Savarna women. It's not percolated down below as radical movements have, in a way. So women's literature that way has not been received so well in Andhra Pradesh, I'd say, as progressive or radical literature. So I also think that publishers, writers have to keep a ear for what's going on outside, what resonates with people, what do people want to read, and then sort of gear themselves to addressing those issues. The second thing I also want to highlight is, why are women largely in fiction? It's so depressing to see that uh, the rich thinking that we have among us, we sort of shy away from nonfiction. And nonfiction is so important because it shapes the thinking of a nation. Women have been in feminist historiography, women have been in historical writing, oral writing, etc. But in nonfiction, you could count on your fingers, one Vidya Krishnan, one S. Rukmani, one Ania Lumba, whose books have, been remarkable milestones. So that's another thing which I think we need to think about. Why don't women get into nonfiction? Nonfiction would benefit immensely with women's participation. Now, you asked about readers and bookshops. The pleasure of bringing a book is to find the reader. That's for me at least, the reader is like the queen. It's for the reader that we are all there, the publisher, the translator, the writer, the printer. Everybody is there for the reader. So to what I like best about publishing is sitting at a bookstall in the town center, or somewhere in a meeting, and selling books to all kinds of people who come. And I mean, I say that there is no reader who can get away without my selling a book to her. That's my challenge. Whoever it is, I'd find out who they are, where they work, what they do. I'll find a book that fits the reader. Never let a reader get away without buying a book. So identifying with the reader is actually, because I am a reader myself. I love books. I enjoy reading books. So if you get someone who wants to read a book, it's so important to tie the reader and the book together. That's the job I think we publishers do as midwives. And I feel so sad that so many of the good publishing houses have now given over distribution to the giants, to HarperCollins and Penguins, the distribution, or Amazon, and that personalized selling, which we have, which nobody else has. Penguin can't sell personalized selling that like we do, and that we've sort of been defeated by the big corporates. That's something I think it's a tragedy for Indian publishing.
I actually have two follow-up questions, but I think I'll let Soumya respond to her experiences of translating Kutiswarama's book, because again, it speaks to a very rich inner life and it's a non-fiction work also. So in doing that, it is also a subversive way of looking at women's lives. And I really liked how the lyrical, not the lyrical tone, but how the tone is very straightforward. It does not try to mask anything. So, Soumya, what was your experience doing that translation, and also how do you see that translation being fitted into the world of in translations in India right now, with women's translation also gaining some traction?
10 years ago. I'll try to. Yeah, so that was my very first entry into English translation. I have to say that I've never done any translation into English before that, not even a single page. But I read the book. I read the book several times, and I gifted it to several people at the time before I started translating. But it's an entirely different experience translating it, even though you know everything in that book, and you know a lot of things that happened in her life and things like that. Right? So then I started reading things more closely, and her life has a lot of ups and downs, right? Not just as a part in the communist movement, but also coming out of that and in her personal life and things like that. So I can't say how this book will fit into today's world, but I would say uh, there are many things you can learn from her, irrespective of your background. You may not be very fond of say communist background, or I know I have several friends who just go 10 feet away the moment I mention the word, like she was a communist, and then they'll go away, like they're not going to read the book ever. But I think that's a wrong perception to have, there is something in it for everybody. And clearly that book got translated into other Indian languages over the years, some of them via English. So I mean, it shows that there are readers, right? It shows there are readers even today for her story. And in terms of nonfiction, yes, I also think more nonfiction should come, both from the writers but also getting translated. And but I don't come across too many nonfiction books also. Like there are some things which I read some of these books by Rebecca Solnit a few years ago, and I thought these things, they're very good. They have to be translated. But then I was not sure, who will read these things in Telugu. Of course, I'm just a reader. Geeta Garu will know more because she interacts with many more readers like me. But then I think there is always a reader, of course. It's not the job of a translator to find that reader, because it's just one person, right? So, yeah, I don't know that. I guess that's all I have to say.
No, no, it's interesting. I think because all three of you are coming from very different, points, and also very different work spaces. Um, just getting back to Geeta, I had a question around the fact that you said that the women's movement has been occupied by Savarna women, and it's not percolated down. How do you place translations in this? Because translation is also subversive, right? It is a lot of women, say, who write from different regions, also like in the Indian languages, may not belong to Savarna class, or the majoritarian identities, especially if you look at the peripheries. So translations itself gives that option to also question that power structure. So how do you see translations also like that? And because you have 40 years of working in this, and how have you seen it change to how it's looking now? Because I understand you said the radical movements have gone down, but we see different kinds of movements with younger people also talking about like anti-caste work, anti, the work that is the current regime is doing in the Northeast, in Kashmir. So what is your like, how do you see translations being placed in that scale? Wait, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, translations are very important because not every reader is going to be able to read the book in English or the language in which it was written. So translations, because bring that experience to the reader. And in the last 2 decades, we've seen a lot of Dalit literature. And you also see now Dalit women writing. Dalit women writing, I think, started with Bama, with Bama's Karuko and the other books. And then you had Gogu Shamla, and now you have Endapalli Bharti. And I'm sure there are other writers in other languages too. Marathi, certainly, there have been women who are writing. So this kind of writing, but if you weigh it against the Savarna writing, I mean, it's just a drop in the ocean. Savarna women have written and written and, thousands of books, literally. So for the Dalit and BC writers to be able to write is just starting now. So whether that will, disrupt the no, I don't think this is yet time to talk of disrupting the power equation because it's too early. The book has to translate into a critical mass of readers. The readers have to translate into being activists, and then is when you'll see some kind of change, which is a slow process. It's not as fast as one would think. So while there are Dalit women organizations, I think most are NGOs, most are non governmental organizations which have limitations of funding and reach and programs which have to be approved by the funder. So to have the feminist movement, being approached by Avarna women to change the program is, I'm thinking it will take a long time. It's not a quick job.
Actually, thanks, Geeta. Following from that, Itza, do you think you'd like to talk about your experience in this space and how you see movements, which Geeta said really helps in the publishing industry in writing subversive texts also, and in also translating from a space that is clearly like also questioning power structures. What has your experience been? What are you seeing as changes in the current movement?
Yeah,
Oh,
I was
we,
thinking, oh, sorry,
yeah.
you can finish.
No, I unmute.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was actually thinking about all of this as we were having the previous discussion. I think my awareness of like the coming of Dalit literature, Dalit writing, and in general movements in that area is more and more familiar with what has happened in my own lifetime than before it. And I don't know how much I can speak to there being an increase or a reduction or that kind of change in how much literature has come out or not. But I think what has been heartening to see recently is a lot of young people leading the charge on doing very interesting projects that are bringing the publishing industry and digital artwork and that kind of thing together. The second translation that I did was part of this anti-caste SF uh, uh, compilation, where I was seeing which is a lot of Avarna writers, a lot of people, and a lot of allies also coming together to write and translate fiction. And while that sort of change is slowly happening and sort of happening along the lines of sci-fi or taking some of a lot of that movement that I see is happening very much on platforms that are more frequented by younger people. And I also think that besides that existing over there, um, a lot of the charge of doing this kind of subversive work is taken up very much by independent publishing houses. which has always been the case, I think, when it comes to subversive work. But then a lot of questions arise about funding and about getting books out to more readers, because at the end of the day, the publishing industry is a commercial industry. And finally, things do depend upon funding. And so a lot of these books, they'll have, Kickstarter campaigns and things of that sort to support them. But there's the question now of how we can gain more support for the kind of subversive work that is happening. And I think that discussions of feminist, even if not with that label of feminism, but the discussions of subversion have existed in Avarna spaces and Dalit spaces for as long as they have existed. And I think that a lot of quote unquote feminist movements within a lot of Avarna spaces, which is what I have seen. And as a Savarna person, there is only a certain extent to which I can speak on this. But I think it is also very deeply tied with a lot of queer movements and support for a lot of trans individuals. And so a lot of the movements that you see, that I see in Dalit spaces and Avarna spaces in general now are also very tied with those voices. And I think a lot of very downtrodden trans voices are the people, and like trans Avarna voices are the people who are doing a lot of feminist work right now. So I think it might be time to look at or to reframe the way that we are understanding what a movement is, and who are the actors in these movements, and then finally think about what is the practical solution or a way to support these movements, because at the end of the day, I think a lot of the odds are not in the favor of the people who are doing the subversive work. And so there has to be some thought about how to shed light on that and how to bring more support to that.
That's quite interesting, Ipsa, because you also trace a lot of the newer kind of movements, but also in different spaces, which is not traditional publishing, but also feeds into the publishing industry. And actually, I'd like Soumya to weigh in on your experiences of looking at the world of translations, even from the distance that you claim that you are at, and seeing like how that there's a level of subversion in also doing this kind of work. Like, what power structures are we challenging? Like you said, your friends would say, no, this is not like, we're not going to read a communist book. But how about like just telling them to read the book? And, most people I think inside are communists, but would not like to claim that tag. But how do you see these books also breaking that like taboo of like this communist being like this, I don't know, like this boogeyman, like, you keep it at a distance, but actually it is a part of everything we do. So how do you balance that in your work as a translator, or how you see translations when it's from Indian language to English versus also from English to Indian language?
So when personally as a translator, I choose to translate authors that are not previously translated. And I'm also trying to pick authors who are not very well read even within the Telugu audience. Like when I started translating even Bharati, so Bharati's books were, I think, quite popular when I started translating, but there are still many people who, like, she writes in a specific dialect and accent, and if you're not more open-minded about exploring these things and having that initial difficulty and then continuing, many people don't read dialects that they're unfamiliar with. So in that sense, like even within Telugu readers who are voracious readers, there are people who never heard of Bharati, or who think these kind of random dialects and people like coming from some small village, they're not that important as, say, a very famous writer who's getting all the awards and things like that. Even when I was translating Bharati, like a question I got from other people in the writing community is, hey, why don't you translate Volga or P. Satyavati or other people? But they've all already been translated, right? Like a lot of their works are already translated, and everybody like who reads Telugu in English probably know these names already. What is the point in me doing the same thing again? So that is my way of responding to people who say these things should be read or these things should not be read. Like, I mean, everything can be read and every story needs to be heard. And my preference as a translator is to look for those kind of stories, which I think will be of interest to people outside Telugu readers, in the sense of like talking about their specific culture, or like say Malipuram Jagadish, whom I mentioned. All his stories are about Savara people getting adjusted to modernity or thinking about the past or things like that. And Bharati's stories, they are not saying, these people are bad or whatever. They are just celebrating their own lives. So I'm primarily looking for those kind of things, which I think will also interest international audience. I'm not like, there is a question from Bhaskar in the Q&A asking, are you translating for Indians or for international audience? So I'm living outside India, so there is no point in me aiming just at Indian readers. So keeping my capabilities in translation aside, I am looking at a global reader, and that's why I think of adding some explanations here and there while keeping the words intact in some places. And I also show it to some of my colleagues out here before sending somewhere. Like one of my colleagues who also reads a lot of my translations is here in the audience, Gabriel. So thank you for attending. So yeah, so I mean that's how I would respond to this kind of questions. Like I want to look at people who are not translated before and bring them into English if possible.
I just have a quick follow-up question for you. And I think it makes a lot of sense what you are saying. And I just to add to that, we've also seen, and this feeds into Geeta's question about the translation from fiction to nonfiction also. And who is getting translated is a question of power also at the end. Who is getting translated and who gets to translate that person? So when you choose certain people to translate who do not have that sort of like privilege or that sort of power structure, they do not belong to that power structure, you are also subverting in a kind of way. But it also comes back to the idea of labor, how women will be always expected to translate women in a way, like how an upper caste man might not translate a Dalit woman's literature, but it will be the expectation from someone from the community, especially if it's a woman, that it's the same kind of literature. So there's a lot of talk around women's labor also. And how do you see the new tools? Because you said you work in AI, right?
Yeah.
How do you see AI also impacting women's labor in that way when it comes to translation, when it comes to keeping cultural nuance of translations alive? And when bigger corporations that Geeta mentioned are taking over a lot of this publishing space also.
Yeah, I don't know if this is specific to women, like my answer, but like I
Yeah.
do find AI to be very relevant for translators today compared to, like, say 5 years ago, literary translators compared to 5 years ago. Like a couple of years ago, you may have thought, okay, it's a possibility for some news documents or some legal documents, maybe not for say short story. But then I spoke to a Telugu publisher over a chat recently who was saying, I used ChatGPT to translate this Telugu story into Tamil, and my like she knows Tamil, so, and she read it and she's like, it's so fluent, maybe we don't need human translators anymore. But I don't see it that way, uh, because but where I see AI could possibly be useful is, so if you say, like, there is this example that I took in my office to explain this concept. So there is a Telugu proverb kind of thing which says Kandam Rasinavade Kavi, Pandini Kottinavade Bantu. So this means the one who can write Kandam. Kandam is a metrical poetry poem format in Telugu. So the one who is able to write Kandam is the real poet, and the one who can kill a boar is the real hero. So that's how it goes. So when you give it to, say, Google Translate, it's a very literal translation. It doesn't make any sense for a reader. But with the recent generative AI models, you can actually ask, saying, I'm translating this in this context, and how do you preserve the literary nuance and still generate something? The good thing about this is it then shows you a few variations. And as a translator, you yourself would have come up with something, right? So then it can help you, like, edit your own translation. I'm not saying you don't need editors or you don't need translators or anything, but I think it can help in bringing this, especially this translations involving cultural nuances, potentially better if you're not a very seasoned translator. So, like, if you translate once in 10 years like me, and you're looking for the better ways of phrasing things, and I found it like uh, useful to see, like, some variations of translations and how they read and what may suit more for a book of short stories compared to like some essay or some technical article or something like that. So I do it's not perfect, and it's very bad with general cultural nuances if you just leave an AI on its own. But I think there is a lot of, because they legally or illegally they crawl all the internet and generate their knowledge base, right? Uh, so they do know a lot about us, whether we like it or not. Yeah, I'm anthropomorphizing them, like the large language models, but then I don't know how else to put, what pronoun is the right one to use for them.
No,
Yeah.
no, no. That's very interesting, actually, Soumya. I know we are going to start questions, but I just want to ask Geeta if you'd like to respond to like the entrance of AI models into translations, especially like in the current context. Geeta, you can unmute. Yes, I was.
Yeah, so now every piece of writing, and we get a lot of writing, we get a lot of translation, a lot of scripts. I check first to see is it AI generated, and of course I don't need to go to AI again to ask me, because by now you know what an AI text looks like, and so it's saddening to see that when people use AI to write, it flattens everything out. Okay. But for translations, like Soumya says, for translation and for editing, you're sitting and breaking your head over a particular paragraph, a particular phrase. I think AI is definitely helpful. And I think any technological tool we can't discard. We have to learn how to use it. So it's important that we don't say no to AI. We use AI in whatever way we need to do, but we also recognize its shortcomings, and not encourage writers at least. Now, yes, you may be able to translate. There was a text which I'm a slow reader in Telugu, faster in English. So there was a text I wanted to assess in Telugu, and I said, "My God, I'm spending the next 2 days reading it in Telugu." What I did was I just put it in AI, and I got the text, fairly good text, back, and then I read English. I can read. I'm speed reader. I got a sense of it within about 3-4 hours of the text. So I was amazed at the translation was not bad, but AI, of course, if you don't use it with the right commands, it misses out chunks of text. It doesn't garble things up, but it misses out chunks of text that thing is not important. So I think as a quick tool, AI is important, but and we should use it. But the fine work, the soul of the writing has to be with the writer, the translator.
Thanks, Geeta. Ipsa, do you have any comments you want to add before we move to Q&A?
Not for now, but I think that I'm interested to see what questions people have and
Yeah.
want to.
Okay. So I think Soumya has a question by Bhaskar, which I think they've already answered a little bit. But yeah, Soumya, would you like to add to that? The first question on translating Telugu stories into English. Can you see that question? Should I read it?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
I'll read it out.
Can-
Actually, I'll read it out for the audience.
Okay.
Sorry. So while translating Telugu stories into English, do you keep Indian English readers in mind or international readers? If international readers, how do you convey the cultural significances that come in the fiction to international readers? Yes.
Um, yeah, okay. So, like I said, I'm living outside India, and I want, you know, these people here also to know about translations from my language or other Indian languages, not just translations from some European language or something like that. So, in my head, at least, my intention is that everybody should be able to read, and even within India, right, there is no one single Indian reader, right? There may be people, depending on how they grew up, there may be people entirely unfamiliar with culture within their own region, right? Like they may be as good as a international reader at that point. So I think that distinction may not be very relevant today compared to how it was like 20, 30 years ago, at least in like, I mean, I mostly interact with people in urban regions, so I may be like very wrong in this. So yeah, we are primarily writing for readers, right? Like the reader may be an international reader, maybe an Indian reader. So the international readers may need some more context. So that's why at least when I was trying to write this book, translating these short stories, I tried to keep some of the native words as is, because there should be some aspect of the local culture that should come into English, and then added a glossary in the beginning, like kinship terms and things like that, as an explanation. So an Indian reader may not need that explanation that we have so many kinship terms and things like that, but an international reader may. So whoever wants to take that information will take. Otherwise, people will just go directly jump into uh, the translation. And it was all like I tried to mostly write in text. Like if I use some local food name as is, then I try to just add a sentence there saying, I mean, trying to fit that there. Like Geeta Garu and team did a lot of heavy editing there, so thank you for that. So yeah, so that's how I tried to incorporate cultural nuance into English translation. And personally, I think I'm completely okay with that, because if you're reading like a say Portuguese novel or something like that, they freely use these phrases here and there. If you're not familiar with that, you just Google, right? Like that's what I expect all these people who are reading these Telugu books in English translation to do. I mean, that much of effort does not hurt anything. Like if you're interested, you know, it doesn't hurt to know more. And also, it's sometimes like there are no equivalent English terms, right? Like yeah, we have a little audience here.
Yes, yes,
So
very
yeah,
important.
yeah. Sometimes we have a lot of words we just don't have English terms, right? Like it doesn't make sense to look for an equivalent English term that is not the same, but maybe relatively the same, like on a 50% similarity level or something like that. Like it's okay to just keep the terms that you use in that language and somehow make it make sense to the reader. So yeah, that's my take on it. And thanks, Bhaskar, for asking that question. And for the audience, Bhaskar is also translates from Telugu to Tamil, and he translated some of the Bharati stories also into Tamil.
Thanks, Soumya. There's a comment from Bhaskar for Ipsa. So I'm just going to read it out, Ipsa, if you want to add anything. It's heartening to see Ipsa embark on her translation journey at such a young age, an inspiring start to what promises to be a meaningful literary path. One particularly insightful remark she made would stay with me. When I translate a work, I understand it more deeply than I ever could by simply reading it. That speaks volumes about the transformative power of translation, not just as a linguistic exercise, but as a way of truly inhabiting a text. So would you like to add a comment or just comment?
Yeah, I think that thanks for bringing that up from what I said, because I think it really ties back to all of the discussions we've been having so far, both to the discussion about AI that Soumya and Geeta ma'am did, especially the note on the fact that ultimately the soul of the text rests with the translator, which I think is going to remain true. Because ultimately, I think what we look at as the untranslatable in a text, which is the term that is thrown around a lot, I think ultimately comes down to the cultural context of it, which I think somebody, a translator, is the person who best understands that. And otherwise, as well, I think Soumya was also mentioning earlier about what are the kinds of texts we should be choosing when we translate it, and what are the texts that should be eventually chosen for translation. So I think that as when you approach a text as a not just as a reader, but as somebody who wants to translate it, then you also see the potential and the life in a lot of texts that get ignored. So I think that is why there is a lot of subversive potential in the work of translating.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ipsa. Bhaskar also just wanted to thank Geeta madam for a lovely publisher you are. Shows your passion for the books and publishing. But Geeta, I have one question for you, which I think is directed at you. It's by Lalita Ramakrishnan. I'm a translator by accident, moving from technical and academic translation to occasionally literary ones, from English to Malayalam, from Malayalam and Tamil to English. My question is there really a need to categorize translation into male and female? Can you substantiate? Second question, how do we sell them? Is it safer to go in for e-publishing? Geeta, if you'd like to take that question,
Yeah.
you have to yeah.
Why do we have to categorize? Well, we categorize in our heads all the time. When you pick up a book, whether it's the author or the translator, you first look at the name, and then it's a very intuitive, subconscious process. Is it a woman or a man? And if it's a man, this is the kind of work you're looking for. If it's a woman, you expect something else. There's a different quality in the work. So I think we are only saying the unsaid when we are categorizing men, male and female. The second question is, how do we sell them? I mean, you go out and sell them, and if it's not saleable, then don't do it. Don't, when somebody doesn't want to read something, why do you want to print it? Why do you want to even e-publish it? If there's no reader out there, keep it to yourself, put it by in your chest, and your children or your grandchildren will pick it up and maybe do some editing and make something about it. Because there are too many people out there writing not just substandard. I mean, I can't tell you the kind of terrible things which are being written because people say we must write, we must write. While we do encourage writers, we do encourage translators. There are not so many translator people who take up things with care, but writers, everyone is a writer now. And so you write something and you get it out. You don't have to get it published. It's good to write. It's good to write. It's good to write more. But don't try to sell it if it's not saleable. Keep it by, do another draft, write something else, keep on writing, and maybe eventually you'll get there.
Thanks, Geeta. That was quite an ending to our panel. Basically, translate more and edit your writing and maybe get it translated if it's good enough. So, yeah, I think I'll just hand it over to Asha and Ishani. Thank you so much again for all speaking so freely and openly, and also so critically engaging with the idea of women in translation. Ishani, Asha, over to you.
Thank you all so much for doing this. I think while we were listening to you, we realized that it's nice for us to be able to have diversity in terms of like your experience, what you write, what you like writing, what you like reading. And I think it's given us a wide array of things to sort of think about and how each of you approach writing, reading, as well as translation. Thank you to Soumya for waking up very early and joining us.
There is some question in the Q&A.
Oh, right. Wait, there is, right. So Shreya has a question saying, could you speak about an editor's work in translation? So perhaps we could take that and we can close. Any one?
I think maybe Geeta would want to take this.
Yeah, I'm a newbie here because we've started. I don't edit Telugu. Okay, I read and I can only say this is good, not good. But I don't have a sense of the nuance. And English, we've been working for about 3 years. Oh yes, but I did all those other books for Zuban, Ratna Press, Penguin. Yes, so it's a editor's work in translating is like very tough. Soumya's actually, I sat on it for a year, couldn't figure out how can one improve, how can one bring this nearer to the English reader. It like took me a year to just read it and read it and read it till every word is in your head. You know the text backwards. So the editor's work is tough. Now, if you just want to do a kind of correction of the English is a different thing. But to sit with the original text, sit with the English, is there a better way to phrase this? I think the editor's work is the toughest of all because it's unseen. The translator is out there. She's speaking about her experience. The editor can never share what has been taken off and what has not been taken off, how it's been done. It's not done. Editors are, behind the screen thing.
Soumya, you have your hand up. Do you have anything to add?
No, my daughter raised the hand, not me. I don't have anything.
Okay. No, so thanks, Geeta, again. Now over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for sharing your experience and for everyone who left such lovely comments and had their questions. We do this every month. So we'll have our next session, like the details, so it would be up and running on our social media and newsletters. So you can follow us to stay updated. And thank you to Vidisha, Ipsa, Geeta, and Soumya, and the little one for joining us and making this such a pleasant and lovely conversation. I hope to see all of you again soon for our next session, and I hope you have a great rest of the evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Good night. Thank you so much for joining us.